Welcome, everybody. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today for this special discussion, Leading the Press for Equity conversation with David Kelly. Quick introductions. I'm Bobby Lucas, partner at Dinsmore. I chair our corporate department. I'm also our Chicago office managing partner. Thrilled to be here with you today. Joining me is my partner, JT Wilson. He's in our labor and employment department. He heads up our labor and employment practice and team here in Chicago. Thrilled to be able to put this presentation on, and we'll introduce our guest in just a second. Dinsmore has empowered all of its offices across the country to, push forth their own anti-racism and equity initiatives, particularly over the past year. And a lot of those have gotten underway in Chicago. We've, in the last few months, we've kicked off a series of internal conversations where we come up with topic. Everybody's asked to do a little bit of research, whether it's watch a video, read an article, and then we break out into small groups, have a conversation around the topic. We view this as an external extension of one of those types of conversations. Thrilled to be able to offer this to folks throughout Dinsmore, as well as a number of our clients who I know are joining us today. So hopefully there's a lot of takeaways here, and with that, I'll turn it over to my partner, JT, for some further intro.
Thanks, Bobby. Greatly appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. So glad that you're able to join us here this afternoon. And to each of you, our listening audience, please welcome from the Windy City to the Bay Area, one of Chicago's very own David Kelly, Chief Legal Officer of the Golden State Warriors. By way of introduction, in his current role, David is responsible for all legal matters affecting the company, including transactions, disputes, and compliance. David also manages player development, salary cap management, and luxury tax planning for the team. And David oversees the organization's human resources and public and governmental affairs departments, assists with college player scouting, and oversees many of the company's key projects and initiatives on both the basketball as well as the business sides. Welcome, everyone. David Kelly.
Thanks, JT. How you doing?
Doing well, thanks. And for our audience, a few notes as we proceed here today. Everyone's doing a great job of it so far. We ask everyone please remain on mute so that we can minimize any feedback we receive during the broadcast. And please use the chat feature. We want this to be an engaging conversation. Please use the chat feature to ask any questions you might have. And we'll try to leave some time at the end also for some conversation on a few of those topics that you might raise. And with that, I turn it back over to Bobby Lucas.
Excellent. Thanks, JT. David, we'll kick this off with perhaps a question or a few questions, a topic. I know it's near and dear to JT's heart and mine as the father of 5 daughters between the two of us. And I happen to have it on good authority. You grew up in a house with 3 sisters. So perhaps, similar views on from your perspective, but love you to take a couple minutes and just share your thoughts on, gender equity or lack thereof from whatever perspective you want to attack it in sports, just how you've seen it and perhaps talk a little bit about how your family or your upbringing, growing up in a house with three sisters. I think they were all older. I could be mistaken on that, but I get a nod. So that's certainly
all your facts are correct.
Well. Yeah, excellent. But just talk a little bit about how that may have shaped your views on it and how it's informed some of the things you're able to do in your current role.
Yep, yeah, glad to. First off, thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys. As you said, around some topics that are near and dear to my heart. 3 older sisters. 2 of my sisters were phenomenal athletes. My other sister is probably the biggest sports fanatic that I ever met in my life. And so it was never foreign to me to have women who were either involved in sports or very passionate about sports. My sister was a year above me. She was the best athlete from our neighborhood. And we had some good athletes that came out of our neighborhood. She was All-American gymnast at UCLA, national champion in gymnastics. My oldest sister is probably the roughest and dirtiest basketball player I ever played against. And so it was never, a thing for me. That said, I'm sure that I carry my own implicit bias. I'm sure that I have my own think until we see certain things, we don't expect those things. And so I'm always trying to check myself and make sure that I'm parking whatever implicit bias that I have at the door. I don't presume to be a perfect man. And I think the only way to move towards a greater understanding in a more equitable world is to look at yourself through the same lens that you would want someone that you look at other people. So with that, I think about sports specifically off the court and very male-dominated industry. No reason for it to be male-dominated, as I said. Just like my sister, there are a number of women who are very passionate about sports. And in my role, I've yet to be asked to make a jump shot. And so my athletic ability does not determine my ability to sit in the seat that I sit in. And so there's no reason why anyone else can't sit in the exact same seat. And so why is it that we have so many men that dominate sports on the front office side? And I think it's the implicit bias that we as men bring to the roles that we're in. And so always making sure that I'm checking myself, that I'm looking in the organization at the Warriors and empowering. Sometimes I hate to use that word because it's not so much me having power and giving it to someone else. It's a lot of times it's me just shutting up and giving space for other people to have a voice. It's sometimes maybe checking my male colleagues when unbeknownst to them, maybe they talk over a female colleague or repeat something that a female colleague has said in order to put the stamp of approval on it. And just all these subtle ways that I think that sometimes we marginalize female voices unknowingly. And so making sure that I try to call it out and be receptive to it when it's called out with respect to something maybe that I've done. And so that's the way I at least try to approach it, and I'm always open to be corrected and by my female colleagues at the Warriors. And just in terms of not on the subject of not seeing things, a few years ago, all referees were male throughout pretty much all sports. Absolutely no reason for that to be the case. And until you see a female referee, you sometimes don't believe that, it doesn't even cross your mind that it's out of place, and it should. So that's what I mean in terms of, putting women inside of, or seeing women inside of positions of power, and then it ceases to be foreign, and then hopefully that opens the door for more opportunities.
Yeah, and I think it's a point well taken about you see it until you see it, you don't, it doesn't seem real, doesn't seem as normal, and then you see it and it starts to become commonplace. I know the NFL this year had a female referee in the Super Bowl, and I think doing a little research in advance of this, I think we're all pleasantly surprised the number of female assistant coaches that are in the NBA now as well, and it continues to build on itself, which is great. Shifting gears a little bit, and this next topic certainly touches on gender, but also anti-racism and equity in the broader sense. I'd like to take a little bit of time maybe to hear your perspective or hear some insights on what Golden State is doing specifically around some of these issues. Again, whether it's anti-racism initiatives, gender equity initiatives, any other equity initiatives. Be curious, and I know Dinsmore and many of our clients that are listening in have undertaken initiatives both internally and externally, and would love to hear what Golden State is up to in that regard, and a little bit perhaps about the process, about how some of those things came about and how they're developed.
Yeah. So just diversity and inclusion has been something that we've been striving for a number of years. I think over the last year, we've tried to put it on steroids and really lean into it in a more intentional manner. Luckily for us, one of the things that we had put in place before, this past summer with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, were ERGs, employee resource groups or affinity groups. And so those ERGs were up and running when the murder of George Floyd happened and the protests that came out of that happened. And so once we leaned into those ERGs, it didn't seem foreign to our employees, that it was something that was a matter that was important to the Golden State Warriors, because I think we had already laid some groundwork. So I think that was important that we had done a little bit of prep work, but significant prep work prior to. So then coming out of that moment, not even out of, in the midst of that moment, we leaned into what we call a heart, feet, tongue, wallet. And that comes from a statement that our two chief owners, Joe Lacob and Peter Gruber, made on the heels of the George Floyd's murder and the protests that were happening around the country. And it was that the Golden State Warriors would use our heart, our feet, our tongue, and our wallet to be anti-racist. So then we as an organization, I mean, it came from the top. As an executive team, we looked at that statement and we said, this needs to be our platform and our framework through which we approach this work. And so when we talk about heart, we're talking for our executive team level and now across the organization, we're talking about the way we approach our employees. And so our ERGs, I was glad to hear that you said you have topics that groups will research and then come and discuss. It's creating a culture in which formerly taboo topics become commonplace and are able to be discussed. I mean, that's the most important thing. So one of the things that we did for our employees under the rubric of heart is that we put together 7 2-hour trainings where we had an outside trainer come in and talk about anti-racism, talk about white supremacy, talk about anti-blackness, and use those words. And I think it was very important for people to hear those words being used and to really confront a very difficult topic that I don't think anyone wants to be on the wrong side of, but people just don't always know how to discuss. So I think that was very helpful, and all that on the rubric of heart. When we talk about feet, we're talking about how do we show up in the community? What are we doing with our community partners, our sponsors, and then community organizations that we work with? Are we engaging? If there are peaceful rallies going on, are we engaging as the Golden State Warriors in that rally? Are we creating a space for employees to participate in that rally? Are we covering it and using our microphone as the Warriors in order to give light to this? And so that's what we mean when we talk about feet. That aligns also with tongue. When we talk about tongue, we're talking about, all right, what are we using? How are we using our platform? As a sports team, we have an outsized megaphone. I always like to say that our perceived importance outstrips our actual importance in the world. But okay, so how can we use that to the benefit of a cause that's greater than ourselves? And so what sort of press releases are we putting out? What sort of social media content are we putting out? During Black History Month right now, during last night's game, I don't know if you saw the various different pictures of, leaders in the Black community, past and present. How are we just using that space that could be sponsor ad space for maybe something that is not sponsor ad driven, right? So how are we using our tongue in a way that is aligned with what Joe and Peter said was something that we were going to do as an organization? And then wallet sort of speaks for itself. It's whether it's through supply channels and reviewing how diverse our vendors are, whether it's looking at the organizations that are foundation funds and that are community relations group funds, and making sure that they are involved in anti-racist work, and that there's a diverse group of people, not just Black, but a diverse group of people that we are empowering as the Golden State Warriors. So heart, feet, tongue, wallet is the way that we approached it. And then just last week, we had a town hall. We have every couple of months, we have a town hall for all employees. And we came out and we gave an update on each of those. So we're tracking this and we're trying to quantify it and trying to measure what our progress has been and where we need to get better for each of heart, tongue, feet, and wallet.
Appreciate that. How I know you mentioned it heart, tongue, feet, and wallet came from the top down. Who was involved in the more specific implementation? I know you referenced the executive committee, but how far within the four corners of the organization did it stretch in terms of conceptualizing, implementing, execution, et cetera?
Yeah, it depends on for each rubric. So it came from Joe and Peter, so it came from the top, which always helps. Always helps when the tone is being set at the top, and they can not trickle down but cascade down. So then our executive team, which C-level VPs, we met and we talked about that this needs to be we need to really seize upon this as coming from Joe and Peter and put some actual flesh around it and begin to measure it. And then we have a racial justice task force that we started during the summer last year that involved employees at various different levels of the organization. So if we're talking about Wallet, it's our director of procurement, it's our coordinator of procurement, it's our community relations, not just VP, but directors and managers all the way across the organization. If we're talking about tongue, obviously that's our marketing group and our public relations group. And our public relations group is very aligned with our players as well. And so it's making sure that we're aligned with our players and that we have an opportunity to magnify their voice or amplify their voice that we're doing so. And so it depends on who is involved, depends on whether it's heart, tongue, foot, or wallet, which department is involved. But in terms of it came from the top, then it got fleshed out at the executive level, and then the actual implementation is across the entire organization.
Thank you. And last follow-up on that, what, maybe it's a little bit of personal opinion and not even speaking for the Warriors, but you alluded to it, that some of the ERGs and some other initiatives were in the works or had been put in place already. What do you think it was about whether George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, what I'll call the more national attention on the issue that really caused it to be kicked into overdrive for the organization?
Well, I think the same thing of why it was kicked in overdrive for the country and for the world. The fact that it was on camera. This is not new. We've been talking about this as Black people for generations. But seeing 8 minutes and 46 seconds of someone who's sworn to protect and serve just casually snuffing the life out of another human being on camera, middle of the day, as if there were no repercussions that ever could happen. I think that is what really galvanized people across, across races, and across the world. And so it's seeing it. Seeing is believing, as we were talking before. Seeing is believing. For anyone who doubted it, you saw it and it's there. And now you have to deal with it, and it's real. And it was so casually done. And that is what I think really animated people across the world, and then us, obviously, as a member of society, as the Golden State Warriors, to say, enough is enough. We really need to be intentional about this. I also think that, we're at an age, a lot of people in leadership positions, where we were not involved in the 60s. And so we learn about the 60s as if, everyone in the 60s was on the side of Martin Luther King, of course, right? That's how we view it. And when in actuality, that was not the case. And we like to believe that if we were alive in the 60s and had positions of power and positions of influence, we of course would have been on the right side of history. And now this is that moment. There hasn't been a movement that's this intense in 50 years. And so where we've all grown up believing that if this moment ever arose, we would be involved, and it doesn't mean that you have to be out marching, but you're using whatever influence you have to be on the right side of this issue. Well, now is our moment. And so I think that is what struck a lot of people as well, that they understood the moment that they were living in and how it would be judged in the future as well.
David, along that same theme of heart, feet, tongue, and wallet, California, as many know, particularly the Bay Area, which houses companies such as Google, Facebook, Salesforce, Tesla, right, has long been viewed by some as the seat of collaboration, innovation, and advancement. How has the Doves organization collaborated with other Bay Area sports franchises to drive innovation and the press for equity?
Yeah. So I have colleagues who are at the the 49ers and the Giants and the A's and the Sharks and on the legal side. And we are regularly on panels. We find ourselves on panels together talking about diversity in the legal profession. One of my allies and partners in crime is Hannah Gordon, who is the chief legal officer at the 49ers, and we conspire regularly around these sorts of issues. Our organizations all leaned into getting out the vote initiative in the wake of George Floyd leading into the election. Nonpartisan, but just making sure that the vote is protected and that people are getting out the vote. And in some ways it was for us in the Bay Area, but in a lot of ways we as the Warriors were collaborating with teams across the NBA and other cities, whether it's Atlanta or Milwaukee or what have you, to help them in terms of getting out the vote inside of their local areas. So having a competition in terms of which organization could do the best job in terms of getting out the vote and registering new voters. So we entered into that with our local teams and with teams across the NBA as well. In addition, there was a California ballot measure that would have, that failed, unfortunately, but that would have ceased to make affirmative action illegal inside of California. And so we and all the sports teams inside of the Bay Area, and I think actually across the state, supported that ballot measure as well this year. So I think so some of these things we've been doing for some time, and some of these things I think, quite honestly, were animated or inspired by what was happening over the summer, and us feeling like we really need to be a lot more intentional in terms of aligning ourselves around the values that we claim that we share. So that's been our approach on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Sports in general, historically have been an outlet of entertainment for segments of the interested society, right? What, if any, conversation arose last year around whether playing games served as a platform to advance the anti-racism movement or initiatives, or if the games actually distracted people from those efforts in society?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation. Well, so we weren't exactly invited to the party at the bubble. So we were not a part of those conversations.
You're allowed to have an off season once every 10 years or so.
Exactly. Once every 6 years. So we were not part of those conversations directly, but obviously we were, as a member of the NBA, involved at some level inside of those conversations. And it was really at the league level and the Players Association level that those conversations were being had. And I just think it's important to have balance. Sports are a distraction. Sometimes you need a distraction. Can it be a distraction and not a detraction? To me, is the question. Is it detracting from the movement and the message, or is it sometimes just giving people a bit of a release while at the same time maybe pushing forward that message? And if you can find that right balance, then I think that's where you need to be as an organization. We're a sports team. We are not community activists, but we can empower, we can promote community activism while entertaining and engaging in sports. It should not be one or the other, is the way that I look at it, especially at the moment that we were in last summer, where to not be involved would have been, at a certain level, silence is itself violence. And so to have denied what was happening in the world and to just go on as if, it's business as usual, we could not have as a league, in my opinion, and the league didn't, just proceed with business as usual. And it was not the right moment to do so. At the same time, in the midst of a pandemic, I do think that people needed an outlet. People needed the return to some normalcy. People cannot allow myself or any of us to just be consumed by grief or despair or anger and eaten up by that. There's a quote from Emma Goldman, who was a feminist some 100 years ago, that I don't want to participate in a revolution. I'm going to butcher the quote, but I don't want to participate in a revolution in which I can't dance. And to me, that's about, you have to have some balance as you're pushing towards a goal. And that goal can be life or death, but you still have to have some sort of balance and some sort of joy. And so I don't think it was improper to play, but you have to play in the right context. And that's where you saw the messages. You saw Black Lives Matter on the court. You saw that the players making sure that they use their voice. And that was the Player Association, along with the NBA, making clear that, yes, we're going to play our games. We're going to proceed. We're going to give people this outlet, this enjoyment that people get from sports, but we are not going to allow ourselves to detract from the larger message that's at hand.
No, I think you raise a very key point with respect to balance, because so often when you have this conversation, you hear concepts that really will lead you to believe that these are mutually exclusive, right? And that you can't do both. And I think to your point, your last point about how the players are free to express themselves, you do still see a certain amount of unity even around issues and league mandates, right? The players are allowed to express themselves, but still within the confines of the general overall culture of the league. And so balance definitely is a theme that rings true. So thanks for elevating that for our consideration.
And I like to think that on most issues, the team and the league and the players are actually on the same side. Obviously, there's going to be issues in which they're on separate sides, but even there, we need to be able to, and I think, the league has done a phenomenal job, along with the Players Association, of finding common ground. But on most of these issues, we're actually on the exact same side. We may want to go about it slightly different. In that ways, I think it's more nuanced, but we're on the same side. And this was an issue that the league and the players, in my opinion, were on the same side of. And it was just a matter of, all right, how are we going to proceed? But we are not diametrically opposed on this issue.
And last year, in a 2020 interview, not the show 2020, but a year 2020 interview with Common, comedian Hassan Minhaj, a son of first-generation immigrants from India, said that hip hop and the NBA really embodied the determined spirit to succeed against the odds held by many immigrants, and really shaped the lens through which many viewed American culture during the 1990s. In your view, what is the role of sports in society?
Yeah, interesting. And interesting you framed it in that context. Even though Hassan Minhaj is a Sacramento Kings fan, but we'll let him slide on that. I think that there's so much. Sports at its core is competition. And there's so much about the American spirit that is embodied and that loves competition and thrives off of competition. So sports is in a lot of ways a reflection of American culture. It's obviously sports, predate America, but there's something about sports in American culture that I think that there's a strong kinship, and I think it's these love of competition. Also in America, we love an underdog story. Like everyone loved the Golden State Warriors until we won a championship, and then we became the anathema. But that's because we were an underdog story. And so when you look at specifically the NBA, so many of these guys come from a background where it's an underdog story. As great as they are as athletes, they are oftentimes coming from an environment in which they are the underdog. And so that is what draws people to sports, I think. And it's across sports. We love to see an underdog succeed. And we just love to see someone compete with, whether it's Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl. I don't care if you're a fan or not. You love to see excellence and you love to see competition. Okay, so that's why sports holds a central part in my mind in American culture. And so then what's the role of sports in that? To me, it's to push the culture forward. It is not just to sit in the culture and just take. It's to take that position that you have where people truly feel connected to their sports teams. I always say that I'm a fan of Apple products, but when Apple comes out with a new iPhone, I don't say we came out with an iPhone. I just go buy Apple's iPhone. But when the Chicago Bulls win, or the Golden State Warriors win, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers win, we won. If you're a fan of that team, we won. And so there's an attachment that people have to their sports team. So what does a sports team do with that? Do you just take from that, or do you give as you're taking from that? And so part of the give is, what are you doing in order to push the culture forward? And I think that on the topic of racial equity, it's allowing people to see, whether it's women competing and in positions of power, African-American men being able to compete and be in positions of power and be central. People see that on the sports field. You saw it with Doug Williams, you saw it with Jackie Robinson, you saw it with Michael Jordan, and then you can see it with Barack Obama. But you have to oftentimes see it inside of a sports context before you can accept it inside of your boardroom or in your White House. And so that's the role of sports, is to, in my mind, is to push the culture forward and to give opportunities to these so-called underdogs to be in positions of power and to be central on the playing field. And then hopefully we will see them as being capable of being central in other arenas of life.
Thank you for that insightful response. I think it was Misty Copeland, the ballerina, who talked about, to your point about that underdog story, who came from a broken home and a very troubled background in California. And she speaks about how that really shaped her and fueled her pursuit of her profession and of her craft. And I think we can all agree, to your point, when you see greatness, you just acknowledge a level of greatness. So thank you for that.
David, on that point, can you talk a little bit about how Golden State is intentional about promoting diversity from within, or off the court, I should say? Again, diversity, however you want to approach that, can take many forms. But how does Golden State go about intentionally creating those opportunities for, as you said, the quote unquote underdogs or minorities in society?
Yeah. So sometimes it's taking the lead of the players who are on the court. So one of the things that we did over the summer is, so Juan Toscano-Anderson, he's a second-year player for the Warriors. He's a first-year player last year. He's from Oakland, very much involved in the community, and he organized a march. And so we, as the Warriors, were like, all right, well, we need to promote this as if we were doing it. The same sort of resources we would put behind it, the same sort of promoting it through our social media channels. We need to promote it in the exact same way. And Steph came out, and Clay came out, and once Steph and Clay show up, then it becomes a much larger. And so sometimes it's taking the lead of the players. Internally on the business side, we have a diversity and equity inclusion council that we started about 5 years ago. And it's making sure that we have people from various different walks of life, different levels of the organization, and that we have buy-in from Rick, our president, that this is a council that is empowered to make change in the organization. Whether it's, we're going to start looking at diversity when we're doing performance reviews. Whether we're going to start measuring and being transparent to the organization as we measure how diverse we are as an organization, and actually, reporting on ourselves and our achievement to the entire organization in a transparent manner. We're going to make sure that we poll our employees about how they feel about whether it's work-life balance, equity, any number of various different issues. We're going to poll them and see how we're doing as an organization, and we're going to hold people accountable for what those results of the polling shows is changes from on an annual basis. And so I think part of it is just measuring things, being intentional about it, and creating. For us, it was creating an internal council that had buy-in from the top, that was empowered to ask questions to measure the results and to suggest and oftentimes itself implement change.
Thank you. We talked a little bit about, that something changed this summer and the attention to these issues became more magnified, and appreciated your answer because it's, similar to what I've talked about with JT and others, that, a lot of the African-American folks that I know weren't all that surprised when some of this stuff came out. And I think it was, white folks like myself, that's like kind of a little more of an eye opener. As you said, it's something that's been known about for a long time. As a result, and I'm going to ask this in such a way so as not to lead you down a path about anything you shouldn't be talking about, but that a lot of the leagues have changed their approach. I won't call them out by name, but a lot of leagues have changed their approach in terms of these issues, and they were brushed under the rug perhaps previously, or given short shrift. And again, I'm not calling out anybody or any team or organization specifically. I'm sure there are various types of motives behind why people are doing things, right? Some people, it's what needs to be done, it's what's right, it's what they believe in. I'm sure there are other organizations or individuals that are supporting it because it's potentially good for business, or they don't want to be the outlier in that regard. And maybe it's a question for both you and JT. I'll ask, does it matter? And if it does, to what extent does it matter what someone or what an organization's motives are in this regard, as long as they're doing something to advance the cause?
Yeah, I mean, in order to have the sustained effort and the impact that you need to have, I think you need to have the right motives. That said, sometimes people develop that over time. Sometimes you just have to start with what you have. And if it's the threat of lost revenue is what gets you to the table, then, welcome in the door. We're not in my mind, we shouldn't be judging people for how they come in the door and come to the table. Just be at the table, be present, and oftentimes maybe listen rather than speak. And we can get something done at the, in the room. And being in the room, I think sometimes none of us are born, whole individuals. No organization is a perfect organization. And so all organizations and individuals are on a path, hopefully, to becoming more perfect. And so whatever your motivation is, I think that people of goodwill can work with that and work from that. And all people of goodwill will grow from that. And hopefully your commitment is deeper a year in than it was, a year ago. And speaking of any organization or any individual, oftentimes I also think that organizations may want to do the right thing, but they're fearful, and they just don't know. I mean, business has been good. Why am I rocking the boat on this issue? I may want to do everything that you're suggesting that I do, but I don't know the repercussions of doing so. But I do know that, you've been a profitable organization over the last 10 years. And so I'm just a little hesitant to do so. And so in that case, I think it's imperative of people who want to bring other organizations to the table to do their own research and analysis on how it is that, yes, things have been great, but things can be better if we engage in this way. And there's data and there's research and that would prove that out. I think that the customers want to feel an affinity and an alignment with the brands that they support. And I think this generation, even more so than prior generations, feels that way. And so I think that there are reasons why people who have the right intentions maybe have not taken certain steps, and they just need, oftentimes they just need a little push, a good-natured push, and sometimes maybe a more of an outside push, but wherever, a little shove, whatever works. But at the same time, I do think that there are, you can work with whatever it is that you have in order to create the environment and the culture that you want to create internally. and the brand that you want to create externally.
Bobby, just really briefly on the point, I think at times companies forget that the workplace is just a microcosm of the larger society. And what you see happening in society permeates in one form or another into the workplace. And so these issues may not be as pronounced and or as visible to the workplace culture, but it's there because the people that the company employs do not live in the company, right? They go to the neighborhoods in which they live in, they belong to the families in which they belong. And so the conversations are important to have because the reality is that, and this is pure numbers, most individuals live, we as America, we are still a very segregated society in terms of where people physically live. And in some instances, the most diversity people get is actually in the workplace. And so, these issues are definitely, to David's point, it's important to build consensus and say, hey, we're not going to judge you about how you came here. You're here. The fact is you're here, and let's move towards the goal. So I think that nudge, I think David put it, the friendly nudge, I think that's definitely a useful tool to implement. And this next question is actually along those lines. So in 2016, many organizations appeared to really struggle with the issues elevated for discussion by the acts of Colin Kaepernick, Steph Curry, Steve Kerr, right? But now, and you touched on this some, David, and also Bobby, you as well. Now, after the murder of George Floyd, and the deaths of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, last year, there seems to be an audience willing to listen and engage on this subject. Even the nomenclature has changed, David. You mentioned before, there's been a shift in discussions from implicit bias. Now we're talking about institutional racism. We've moved from a press for equality to that of equity. Generally, is there more work to be done in this space?
100%. 100%. Always is more work to be done. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a yes question. I'm not sure how you want me to elaborate. I mean,
yes, period.
You can go ahead and elaborate, please.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I don't consider myself to be an expert. I'm engaging in it the same way that I think any other person of goodwill is engaging in it, but understanding that there's so much more work that needs to be done. I mean, look, 12, 14 years ago, we were talking about we were a post-racial society, right? And so we are very quick to announce, mission accomplished and declare victory prematurely. And so it's not the time for that. There's so much work that has to be done because the legacy of whether it's racism or sexism, we're talking centuries of this. It's not going to be undone in a few months, in a couple of years, through a few panels and tweets, through an election. This is work that needs to continue, and there are always forces who are just more comfortable with the way with the status quo and without things changing. And so a lot of times people just I don't want to be uncomfortable. I'm very comfortable in my sexism. It works for me. Why am I examining this? I'm very comfortable in my racism. It works for me. Why do I have to examine this? And so we have to understand that's human nature. And so there's always work that needs to be done in order to make sure that we are allowing ourselves to be uncomfortable and that we are helping other people to be uncomfortable, but in a safe environment. not uncomfortable in an environment where it's just got you and I'm here to demean you, but all right, we're going to get uncomfortable here for the greater good, for your greater good, for my greater good, and the greater good of the organization.
Yeah, I think
Are you still?
Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
Sorry, I was going to ask along those lines, and it's kind of a question that came through from the audience as well. Are you still feeling, whether it's within Golden State organization, the Bay Area, society more generally, et cetera, the same momentum behind this as you felt over the summer? I know there's been some intervening events. The pandemic's continued to drag. We had an election and, the events of January 6th, et cetera. Are you still feeling a similar momentum behind it as you did maybe a few months ago?
I don't know, quite honestly. I don't think society-wise, obviously we're not having the marches and the rallies, and so I think the intensity has changed. We are still, as an organization, returning to it. As I mentioned, we just, in our town hall from last Friday, we were just talking about, making good on the commitments that we made. There's been a great amount of programming that we've done during Black History Month this year that was different than we've always done programming, both internally and externally. But this year was a different intensity. Leading into Women's Empowerment Month next month, there's a lot of, and so I think it's changed from, in some ways, outward protest, hopefully into inward reflection and action. And over the next year, it needs to be the institutionalization of that action into processes and systems. And so I think it's changed. Hopefully it's becoming much more ingrained in the organization, not going away, but just it's morphing from, the shock of shocking people into action to now the actual actions being taken, and then hopefully the systems and processes changing from those actions.
Yeah, Dave, I think you raised a key point. So you talked about the innate human desire to keep things the same, right? We spend most of our day trying to keep things the same. But I'm frequently reminded that although change is inevitable, growth is optional. And it's something that you mentioned, the efforts and the energies were in the peaceful protests and the visible to raise awareness, right? But now that effort and energy has somewhat shifted to the implementation, right? Now let's execute. We have your attention, we have the awareness. Now let's execute on that. And along that vein of the execution piece, as fans look forward to the return of the Splash Brothers, what should we expect from the Dubs in the future?
Wow.
In this space, in general, in this space.
Yeah. So, look, we have a phenomenal group of guys on the court. We have a phenomenal coach who leads in this space. And so just having that core has served us so well as an organization. And I'm not even talking about just the rings, just who they are as people and how outspoken Draymond is, how soft-spoken and effective Steph can be, how genuine Clay is. And so reuniting them together on the court and off the court is something that we really look forward to as an organization. There's so much from the business side that we take from the basketball side. Steve Kerr, I think it's his first year, he talked about that as a team, we were going to be strength in numbers. And that became our marketing slogan. It was something that he just said in a one-off interview. And on the marketing side, same way we did with Heart, Feet, Tongue, Wild, we just seized on it's like, that's coming from leadership. We need to grab that. That's gold. And it became our marketing slogan for the next, 6 years. But also became the way on the business side that we try to create our diversity, equity, and inclusion around strength in numbers. That there has to be diversity. There has to be a great number of diverse opinions that come together and create a greater whole. And that's what Coach Kerr has done on the court. Steph is very different from Draymond, very different from Clay, very different from Kevon Looney, very different from Wiggins. But together, they were able to create something. They've created something. I think they will continue to create something great. Well, that's what we are trying to do. And we look to them as an example on the business side. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a executive team that does not look the same, think the same, speak the same, that can be as different as the guys are on the court, and even more so different when you talk about gender, bring gender into it, right? And that together we will be able to create an organization that is as successful as they've been on the court. And so, yeah, they lead. I mean, they lead in terms of the way they perform, and then if we're paying attention, there's a secret sauce to how they perform that we can take on the business side and that we can implement.
Yeah, and to your point about the strength and the numbers, that distinction, that difference of perspective, whether it be gender or ethnic or whatever, it really does allow you to get a different perspective, to gain a periscopic view, and really drives innovation. So thanks for elevating that for our consideration, Bobby.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was going to say, I want to maybe we wrap up shortly because we have a number of good questions from the audience. I want to make sure we get to a couple of those as well. But David, maybe to draw a couple analogies here, right? NBA organizations have fans, law firms, our clients that are listening in have customers, clients. NBA teams have sponsors, other business partners, that they've teamed up with. Law firms and our clients have vendors, other partners, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about, over the last 8, 9, 10 months, kind of trying to strike that balance, how Golden State has gone about those conversations? Because I'm sure, not every sponsor, not every business partner, not every fan, of course, is going to view things through the same lens that the organization views them through or has chosen to view them through, or supportive of initiatives. And, the organization still exists as a business, and there's a bottom line to be had. What have the conversations been like in terms of striking that balance? It's something I think everybody on this call probably is thinking about or has dealt with at one point or
another. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the key word you said is balance. I think it's understanding what you are and who you are, and having a core set of values and a mission. And are you going to be true to that mission? I am not a community activist. I am the general counsel, chief legal officer for the Golden State Warriors. Okay. And in this role, though, can I push things forward in a way that augments what a community activist is doing? And can I do it in a way that does not alienate our fan base, but that maybe pushes them along in a direction that's consistent with our values as an organization? So I think you first have to start with, what is your mission? What are your values? And you have to always be true to what those are. And they have to be large enough to allow you the space and the room to grow. And then you will be attracting fans and clients who are consistent with those values. And in some instances, they may be pulling you in the correct direction. In some instances, you may be pulling them in the correct direction. But as long as it's consistent with your values and you know who you are, like I could quit tomorrow and become a community activist. I actually could do that. But that's not what I've chosen to do. And so I'm going to have to use the tools in the profession that I decided that I'm going to practice in. But is there a way that I can use those tools in a way that's consistent with the values of the organization and my values, that pushes the organization forward and pushes our partners forward? And oftentimes, as you find yourself doing that, you realize your partners have very similar values and are already moving in that direction anyway. Like JP Morgan Chase's, one of our key sponsors, JP Morgan Chase is very involved in Black empowerment. They have a platform called Advancing Black Pathways. Well, it really came to the fore that this was something that we could connect on when we started to push, and then we understand a little bit more about the way that they are already pushing and have been for a number of years. And now there's a greater synergy that we didn't even realize as fully as maybe as we should have realized, say, 2 years ago. So oftentimes, I think when you start out on the road, you realize you have more allies than you think you had amongst your clients and your partners.
Yeah, along those lines, you talked about skills. In the game of basketball, point guards are frequently, called the floor generals. They capture the role of coach on the actual court. Now, although you present to us as the GC, and chief legal officer of Golden State Warriors, as a former point guard, which strategies or skills did you utilize to harmonize the interests that you talked about of corporate partners and sponsors, the players, and the stakeholders of the franchise?
Yeah. So the thing that it's funny. I was a point guard because I was short, probably more so than I had leadership. To be quite honest, I like to tell myself when I was young, I told myself it was because I was a great leader. I think it was because I was 5 feet tall. But from my background, I think the thing that I try to draw on, and I think a lot of times, African Americans and women and Latinos, we find ourselves inside of situations in which we are not the majority. And so you have to learn how to influence people without being in the majority position. And there's a negotiation that has to go on in order to work your way through the world and get to the position where you're a partner at a law firm, right? And so there's an ability to negotiate situations and influence people that you have. And recognizing that and understanding that and bringing that to bear can help you to synthesize, to see the commonalities between your fan and your client and your sponsor and your president and your owner, and your players, and finding that sort of ability to negotiate between all of these different competing interests, because I think a lot of times that's what we've done. And so the thing in my background that has probably helped me the most is growing up in a situation. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, where I was not in the dominant group, and I had to learn how to negotiate and be powerful, and at least think I was a leader inside of those spaces, when I was not able to just have the loudest voice and people would listen to me off the bat. And so bringing those skills to bear, I think has helped me. And I think all of us, whether it be white male, whoever, all of us have been in those situations, and we need to draw on those experiences of how to influence people when you don't have the floor.
Thank you.
If you have time, and maybe just a couple quick hitters from the audience that have come through. The first, there's been a few questions around. It's back in the news with the Mavericks, but not asking you to speak about the Mavericks necessarily, but the national anthem, and just people curious about what discussion within Golden State occurred at any time. And I know it went on previously, but then you guys weren't in the bubble necessarily. But is that still something that's being talked about, and with what kind of frequency, or what have been the discussions around that?
Yeah, we haven't really had a lot of conversations about it internally at this point in time. Quite honestly, it's a real lightning rod. On one hand, the question is, why do we play the national anthem before sporting events when we don't play it before? I think Coach Van Gundy said, we don't play it before movies. We don't play it before the opera. We don't play, like, what is it about sporting events okay, that's a very valid question. On the other side, we have been playing it before sporting events. And so now to not play it is a statement. And so we find ourselves inside of this sort of never land between, should we revisit whether or not it should be played, but what are the repercussions of revisiting that? And I think it's a very difficult situation that sports in general find themselves in. I don't have the answer to that, quite honestly. I maybe know half the questions, but I definitely don't have the answer. And it's not something that right now, when we're having our games, we don't have fans in stands, and so it hasn't been an issue. I don't know that it will be an issue going forward, but it has been in the past, obviously, and so I would bet that at some point in time it's going to become an issue again. We'll just have to confront it as a league.
Sure. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the WNBA and maybe the relationship between WNBA, NBA, the support that's been given around a lot of these issues? And, again, being father of 3 daughters, I've watched a fair amount of WNBA and follow it with my girls. And, it seems like in some instances, some of the WNBA players or perhaps the league or some of the teams were even out in front of some of these things earlier than some of the other leagues. So if you share any perspective you have on that.
Yeah. So, the WNBA was clearly out in front of the NBA, out in front of the WNBA players, out in front of the NBA players. I don't think there's any question about that around these issues. And it was, on one hand, that shouldn't be a surprise, right? It shouldn't be. The women were out in front and they were leading. Next question. That's not, that shouldn't be an issue. But it was beautiful. It was really good to see, and it was good to see, especially NBA athletes in a male-dominated profession, really saluting the WNBA athletes who are out in front on these issues. Every year we have a business of basketball meeting with our players, and so we go over some issues that are off the court. Sometimes we talk about investing, sometimes we talk about any number of issues. But we had our meeting this week, and we talked about social justice and racial equity. And we invited Natasha Cloud from the Washington Mystics, who sat out last season to focus on social justice and racial equity. She was on a panel speaking to our players, and the level of respect that they have for her, it was just apparent in the call, and it was just really good to see her command that level of respect as a leader and as a peer, as a basketball player, with our team, with our guys. And so, this summer the WNBA was phenomenal on these issues in a way that I think all other. You saw a number of Steph Curry talked about it about a month ago. That I think a lot of male athletes took note and really gave them their kudos on.
David, we greatly appreciate you for participating, set some time aside to talk with us this afternoon. We want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience as we wrap things up here today?
No, these are great questions. I really appreciate the ability to just delve deeply into a topic that matters, and it obviously matters to Dinsmore. And so I really salute you in that respect, in opening up this sort of just open dialogue and conversation. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate in it. Thank you.
David, thanks for your time. Bobby, JT Wilson, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, David.